At 10 o'clock on Christmas morning, 1945, the fire chief stood in the ashes of the Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and said there were no bones. 5 children had slept in that attic the night before: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie and Betty, ages 5 to 14. If they died in that fire, investigators expected to find them. No remains were ever positively identified as theirs. Not that day. Not in 1949, when investigators dug up the site again. Not ever. For 80 years, this has been told as a kidnapping mystery. Clues, sightings, a billboard on the highway. A colder, sadder reading is just as possible. A case that may have become impossible to resolve within days, because everything that could have proven what happened, one way or the other, was gone before anyone got the chance to look. Welcome to Ash and Alibi, the cases that were never closed. This is usually told as a kidnapping thriller: the strange car, the threatening call, a billboard on the highway for decades. We're telling what's underneath it. In the first 96 hours, nearly everything that could have proven what happened to 5 children was lost, destroyed, or never gathered, which is why this case has stayed unresolved for 80 years. The Sodders were Sardinian immigrants who'd built a trucking business in this small West Virginia coal town. George Sodder, born Giorgio Soddu, was an outspoken critic of Mussolini's Italy. He and Jennie had 10 children. On Christmas Eve, most of the family gathered at the house. Just after midnight, the phone rang. An unfamiliar woman's voice, asking for someone who didn't live there, laughter behind her. It reads, looking back, like a setup. It wasn't one. Investigators later located the caller and confirmed she had no connection to the family or the fire. About half an hour after that, something struck the roof, hard, then rolled. What it was has never been confirmed either way. Around 1:30 in the morning, George woke to find his home office, near the fuse box and the phone line, on fire. 6 of 11 in the house escaped: George, Jennie, and children, Marion, John, George Jr., and 3-year-old Sylvia. 5 did not: Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jennie, 8, Betty, 5. The attic stairway was already burning by the time anyone reached it. What came next has some mundane explanations, and one piece that doesn't. The ladder that usually leaned against the house was gone. Found later, 75 feet down an embankment. That one has never been explained. The phone was dead. A lineman found the wire cut, not burned. Years later, a man admitted he'd cut it himself, thinking it was a power line. The water barrel outside was frozen solid. Both trucks, running fine the day before, wouldn't start. A son-in-law would later suggest the plainer explanation, that in the panic, the engines had simply flooded. 2 of those have ordinary explanations. The ladder is the part that stays open. By the time Fayetteville's fire department reached the house, there was little left to save. It was 1945. The department was thinned by the war, and Chief F.J. Maurice couldn't drive the truck himself. He had to wait for someone who could. The house burned to the ground in under an hour. At 10 that morning, Chief Maurice stood in the wreckage and said what would define this case for the next 80 years. There were no bones. Not one fragment he was willing to call recognizable. He believed at the time that the fire had simply burned hot enough to consume everything. If a detail like that stops you, a search that found nothing it could call remains, that's worth a like right there. Because what comes next is the part almost no one tells. Why that fact was never actually tested. The search of the ashes lasted only a few hours, on a site still smouldering from the night before. The local paper's own coverage contradicted itself within days. First, all 5 bodies found, then only part of one body. Death certificates for all 5 were issued December 30th. The funeral held January 2nd. No fuller investigation had yet taken place. 4 days after the fire, George had the site bulldozed, 5 feet of dirt over the ashes, before the state fire marshal's fuller investigation. He meant it, by his own account, as the start of a memorial garden. Whatever the fire had left behind was now buried. The inquest ruled the deaths accidental, caused by faulty wiring. reached quickly, by a jury that included a man who'd once threatened George over his politics. If you were designing a case that could never be closed, you'd design it exactly this way. Two pieces of physical evidence would later surface, and neither survived scrutiny. A rumor held that Chief Maurice had quietly buried a small box at the site, said to hold a heart from the ashes. George had it dug up. A funeral director examined the contents and identified them as fresh, uncooked beef liver, never burned, never human. In 1949, the family had the site excavated properly, under a pathologist's supervision. Diggers found a dictionary, some coins, and several human vertebrae. The Smithsonian's examiner concluded the bones belonged to someone 16 to 22, older than Maurice, the eldest missing child, at 14, and showed no exposure to flame. His best guess, they'd arrived with the bulldozed filled dirt itself, possibly from a cemetery near Mount Hope. 4 years, and the most thorough search this case would ever get, produced bones that almost certainly weren't the children's at all, which meant the case still had no remains it could positively identify as theirs. For 15 years, the family kept the question alive along the region's highways. Billboards went up in 1952, offering a reward that grew to $10,000. Reported sightings drifted in. A rest stop worker near Charleston, who believed she'd serve the children breakfast the next morning. A hotel employee whose claim fell apart once it emerged she'd only seen their photographs 2 years later. In 1967, a letter arrived from Central City, Kentucky, enclosing a photograph of a man in his 30s, the family believed might be an adult Louis. 2 readings of this case have stood, unresolved, side by side ever since. One holds that 5 children died in a fast, hot, wood frame fire, in a blaze no search was equipped to examine properly. A reading Jennie herself partly rejected after her own bone tests, and after the Christmas lights oddly stayed lit. The other holds they were taken alive, a theory the family traced partly to an insurance salesman who'd warned George his politics would cost him his house and his children. Under it, some in the family suspected an extortion plot tied to organized crime, though that was never proven. Neither reading has ever been established as fact. Both remain, honestly, hypotheses. Because the fire took away, within days, the only evidence that could have chosen between them. If you want more files like this one, cases where the record itself, not fate, is why no one ever got an answer, that's what this channel does. Subscribing means the next one finds you. In 1950, West Virginia's legislature called the case hopeless and closed it. The FBI, after briefly working it as a possible kidnapping, closed its file too. Not because the mystery was solved, because the evidence that could have solved it was gone within 4 days, buried, contradicted, or never gathered at all. This was never mainly a kidnapping thriller, and it was never simply a house fire. It's a family denied the right to grieve, not by fate, and not by anything supernatural, but by a system that handed them contradictions instead of proof. George died in 1969. Jennie in 1989. The weathered billboard came down not long after. Sylvia, the last surviving sibling, died in 2021, still without an answer either way. If this file deserved a fair search and never got one, that's worth a like. On Ash and Alibi, the file stays open.